I have spent the last 6 years studying cancer, not as a patient, as a researcher. I know the cellular pathways. I know the treatment protocols. I have read thousands of case files, written dozens of papers, sat in rooms full of brilliant doctors discussing survival rates like they were weather forecasts. I thought that knowledge would make it easier the day I became the case file. It didn't. On a Tuesday in April, I sat in my car after receiving my own biopsy results. And I did what I always do. I analyzed the data. Stage 2A lymphoma. The numbers were actually favorable as these things go. I knew that. The researcher in me knew that, but there's no protocol for the moment you call your mother and she hangs up after 43 seconds. No paper covers that. I don't have time for this right now, Lenora. Call me back when you're feeling better. Click. 7 days of silence. Then her name appeared on my screen again. And I want you to understand something. I knew exactly why she was calling back. I had let one thing slip to a mutual relative. One sentence about Aunt Rosalind's paperwork. That was all it took. I opened the recording app before I picked up. I had 31 years of practice being patient. I could manage one more phone call. Before I tell you what she said, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to Blue Ash, Ohio, and the house where I learned that in my family being capable just meant being disposable. The house on Sycamore Hill Drive had 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a front yard that my mother kept immaculate every single season. Tulips in spring, petunias in summer, chrysanthemums in fall. Rochelle Voss believed deeply in appearances. The yard was proof of that. From the outside, we looked like exactly what she wanted people to see. A comfortable family in Blue Ash, Ohio. Father worked in accounting. Mother taught 3rd grade at Fairview Elementary. The kind of teacher parents requested by name, the kind who got handwritten thank you cards every June. 2 daughters. Nice neighborhood. Clean gutters. What happened inside the house was a different calculation entirely. There were 4 of us, Desmond, Rochelle, Cassie, and me. Cassie was 4 years older. She had my mother's coloring, warm brown eyes, easy smile, the kind of face that photographs beautifully without effort. From the time I was old enough to understand what attention looked like, I understood that Cassie received it in quantities I would never be offered. It wasn't subtle. That's what people don't understand about families like mine. They assume favoritism is hidden, whispered, deniable. In our house, it was simply the architecture. It was built into the structure of every single day. Let me show you what I mean. Cassie attended Walnut Hills, a magnet school across the city. My mother drove her there every morning, 40 minutes round trip for 6 years. When it was my turn to apply, Rochelle said the commute had gotten too difficult. I attended the public school 4 blocks from our house. It was a fine school. That's not the point. The point is that she drove 40 minutes every morning for 6 years, and when I asked, the commute had become too difficult. I never asked again. Cassie's bedroom was painted the color. She chose a soft sage green she had picked from a paint swatch fan at the hardware store. I remember the afternoon she and my mother came home with the samples, laughing, holding little squares of color up to the afternoon light. My room stayed the same flat white it had been since the previous owners. I was 12 before I thought to ask about it. White is neutral, my mother said. It goes with everything. She had already turned back to the stove. I painted that room myself at 17 with money I earned tutoring. Pale yellow. It took 2 coats and most of a Saturday. My mother walked past the open door, glanced in, and said, "That color is going to be very difficult to paint over." She didn't say she liked it. She didn't say she didn't. She just identified the future inconvenience. That was Rochelle Voss in a single sentence. Desmond was quieter about it. My father was a careful man. Careful with money. Careful with words. Careful never to position himself between my mother and any decision she had already made. He wasn't cruel. Cruelty requires engagement. He was simply absent in the way that some men are absent while still being physically present in a room. I remember bringing home a science fair ribbon when I was 11. First place regional competition. I had built a working model demonstrating osmosis in plant cells. My teacher, Mrs. Paulson, had told my parents at pickup that she had never seen a project at that level from a student my age. At dinner that night, I set the ribbon on the table next to my plate. Desmond looked at it. He nodded once, the same nod he gave the evening news when something confirmed what he already expected. Then he picked up his fork. "Pass the salt," he said. That was it. I told myself it didn't matter. I almost believed it. 3 weeks later, Cassie received a C- on a history paper, and my mother spent 45 minutes on the phone with the teacher explaining why the grade was unfair. She took notes. She requested a meeting. She followed up twice. I kept my ribbon in the bottom drawer of my desk under a stack of old notebooks. I want to be precise about something. I am not telling you this story to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling it because I spent a very long time wondering if I was remembering it correctly, if I was being dramatic, if I was, as Cassie would say, making everything about myself. It is a particular kind of damage being raised by a parent who is publicly warm. Rochelle volunteered at the school book fair. She organized the neighborhood holiday drive every December. She was the mother other children wanted. She brought homemade cookies to class on birthdays. She remembered every student's name. What she could not do, apparently, was remember mine in the same tone of voice she used for Cassie's. There was a specific way my mother said, Cassie Light Easy, like the name itself was a pleasant thing in her mouth. When she said, Lenora, there was a half beat before it, a small hesitation, almost imperceptible. I noticed it when I was 9. I never stopped noticing it. By the time I was in high school, I had built a working system. I studied because studying made sense, not because anyone was watching. I applied for scholarships myself, researched them myself, filled out every form at the kitchen table while my mother helped Cassie rehearse for the school talent show in the next room. I didn't ask for help, not because I didn't want it, because I had already learned what happened when I asked for things. I got a 4.0 GPA. I got a full academic scholarship to the University of Cincinnati. I found out about both entirely on my own. My mother's response to the scholarship letter, which I placed on the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning in March, was 4 words. Well, that saves money. She said it without looking up from the permission slip she was signing for Cassie's class trip to Washington. I folded the letter carefully. I put it in my bag. I walked to school. And somewhere on that 4-block walk, I made a quiet, private decision that I would never again place something I was proud of on that kitchen counter and wait. I didn't know it then, but that decision, that small, necessary act of self-protection, was the first boundary I ever set in that house. It would not be the last. And I didn't know it then either, but somewhere in Asheville, North Carolina, an 83-year-old woman named Rosalind Faber was already watching. She had been watching for years, and she was taking notes of her own. I need to tell you about the letter. Not the scholarship letter. A different one. The one that arrived the spring of my senior year of high school in an envelope with a dark blue crest in the upper left corner. I recognized it immediately. I had researched that crest for months. Johns Hopkins University, Office of Undergraduate Admissions, interview invitation. I had applied to their pre-med biology program on a long shot, a 17-year-old from a public school in Blue Ash, Ohio, with no connections, no legacy, no family history of prestigious institutions. Just a 4.0 GPA, a stack of science fair awards, and a personal essay about cellular biology that my teacher called the best piece of student writing she had read in 20 years. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. I picked up the mail myself that afternoon. I usually did because it gave me a few minutes of quiet before going inside. I stood on the front porch and read it twice, then a third time. I was shaking slightly. Not from cold. It was April. I went inside. My mother was in the kitchen on the phone. I waited. She finished the call, set the phone down, and I handed her the letter without saying anything. I wanted to watch her read it. I wanted to see her face. She read it. Her expression didn't change. Hopkins is in Baltimore, she said. I know. That's far. It's a 4-hour drive. She folded the letter along its original crease and set it on the counter. We'll talk about it with your father. We never talked about it with my father. I brought it up once at dinner 3 days later. Desmond listened, nodded in the way he nodded at things, and said, Your mother handles the school stuff. My mother said the timing wasn't right, that the family had expenses, that Cincinnati was an excellent school, and I already had a full scholarship there, and that chasing something like this at the last minute was impractical. I was 17. I believed her. It was not until I was 22, in my second year at University of Cincinnati, that I discovered what had actually happened. A family friend, a woman named Dolores, who had known my mother since college, mentioned offhandedly at a holiday gathering that she remembered when I had gotten that interview invitation from Hopkins. She said Rochelle had told her about it back then. Your mom mentioned she wasn't sure if she'd even tell you, Dolores said, laughing lightly as if this were a fond memory. She said she didn't want you getting your hopes up over something so far away. I smiled. I excused myself. I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a long time. My mother had received that letter before I did. She had opened it, or she had been home when it arrived and read it first, and she had spent time deciding whether to tell me. She had almost chosen not to. I thought about the 17-year-old version of myself standing on that porch, shaking. I thought about how grateful I had been that the letter was there. I had no idea how close it had come to disappearing entirely. I never said anything to my mother about what Dolores told me. I filed it away in the same place I filed everything else, the quiet mental archive I had been building since I was 9 years old, noticing that half-beat before she said my name. The second thing I need to tell you about is Cassie's wedding. I was 26. Cassie was 30. She married a man named Trevor who sold commercial real estate and owned 2 very loud opinions about every topic he had ever encountered. The wedding was held at a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. 80 guests, a 12-piece band. A floral budget my mother mentioned with visible pride was more than my first year's salary as a junior researcher. Rochelle had been planning this wedding for 14 months. I know this because she called Cassie about it approximately 3 times a week, and I could hear those calls from wherever I happened to be in any room of any house I shared with my family during that period. Seating charts, centerpieces, the precise shade of white for the tablecloths. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, not asked actually, informed. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening and said, Cassie wants you in the wedding party. There was a slight emphasis on wants, as though this were a generous gift being extended to me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. 6 weeks before the wedding, Cassie called to discuss the bridesmaid dresses. She had chosen a color called golden mustard. She described it as warm and sophisticated. I pulled it up on the website she sent. It was the precise shade of yellow that turned skin the color of old newspaper. I have a warm complexion, I said carefully. I'm not sure this color works for me. It works for me, Cassie said. That's what matters. This is my wedding. She wasn't wrong. It was her wedding. I ordered the dress. I flew to Scottsdale at my own expense, $840 round trip plus 3 nights at a hotel that Cassie had selected, which ran $190 a night. I paid for my own alterations, my own hair appointment on the morning of the wedding, my own everything. No one offered to cover any of it. No one asked if the cost was manageable. At the reception, my mother gave a toast. She spoke for 7 minutes. I timed it. She thanked the resort staff by name. She thanked Trevor's parents. She thanked the florist. She cried when she talked about watching Cassie grow into the woman she always knew she would become. She did not mention me once. I was standing 6 feet away from the podium in a golden mustard dress holding a glass of champagne I had not touched. 80 people were in that room. Several of them knew me. Not one of them would have known from that toast that Rochelle had a second daughter. I told myself it was Cassie's day. I almost believed it. What I could not tell myself was what happened at 2 a.m. after the last guest had gone and the band had packed up. A small group of us stayed to help the venue staff break down the centerpieces and stack the chair cushions. It was a condition of the rental discount, and Rochelle had asked for volunteers. I volunteered. I always volunteered. We worked for nearly 2 hours. My mother left at midnight. My feet are killing me, you understand? And kissed Cassie on the cheek and told her it had been a perfect evening. Cassie and Trevor had already gone up to their suite by 12:30. At 2 a.m, I carried the last box of decorations to the venue storage room, thanked the staff, and walked back to my hotel alone. My heels were in my hand. The pavement was still warm from the Arizona day. I thought about the toast. 7 minutes. Florist by name, I thought she would not have forgotten the florist at my wedding. You do not forget the florist. You forget the people you have trained yourself not to see. I didn't cry. I had a 4-hour flight back to Cincinnati in 5 hours, and I needed to sleep. I was practical that way. I had been practical my whole life. It was the thing my mother always said about me. Lenora is so practical, she doesn't need much. As if practicality were a character trait I had been born with, rather than a skill I had developed specifically to survive living in her house. I didn't know it then. But that night in Scottsdale, something small and quiet shifted inside me. Not enough to change anything yet, but it was the beginning. The promotion came on a Thursday morning in November. I was 29 years old. I had been at Mayo Clinic's research division in Rochester, Minnesota for 3 years, recruited directly out of my doctoral program, which was itself something that happened to fewer than a dozen candidates nationally that year. I had moved to Rochester with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and the quiet, settled certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The position was lead clinical research coordinator for a longitudinal study on lymphoma treatment protocols. It was by any reasonable measure a significant achievement. My supervisor, Dr. Anand Krishnamurthy, called me into his office and told me I was the youngest person in the department's history to hold the title. He shook my hand. His assistant brought coffee. There was a small card on his desk signed by the entire team. I called my mother that evening from my apartment. I had rehearsed what I would say. Not because I needed a script. I was 31 at the time. I did not need to rehearse phone calls to my mother, but because I had learned over the years that the way I delivered information to Rochelle affected how she received it. If I led with the achievement, she found ways to reframe it. If I led with context, she lost interest before I reached the point. I had been calibrating these conversations my entire adult life. I led with the title. I was promoted today, I said. Lead Clinical Research Coordinator. It's the youngest anyone in my department has. Oh, that's nice. Her voice was pleasant, distracted. I could hear the television in the background. Hold on 1 second. I held on for 40 seconds while she said something to my father that I couldn't make out. Sorry, she said, coming back. What were you saying? I said it again. Lead Clinical Research Coordinator, youngest in the department's history. A brief pause. Does that come with a raise? Yes, a significant one. Good. You're up there in Minnesota. The cost of living must be anyway. I'm glad you called because I wanted to ask if you're coming home for Thanksgiving. Cassie is bringing Trevor and the kids, and I'm trying to get a head count for the turkey. I told her I would try to make it. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in my quiet Rochester apartment, looking at the card my colleagues had signed. Dr. Krishnamurthy had written, "The department is lucky to have you." Someone else had drawn a small star next to my name. I put the card on my refrigerator with a magnet. Then I made dinner and went back to work. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in February, 3 months after the promotion. I woke up with a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon, I had a cough that felt like something tearing. By evening, I could not take a full breath without pain. I drove myself to the urgent care clinic 2 miles from my apartment. I considered calling someone, but it was a Tuesday and everyone I knew was working and was told I had severe pneumonia and needed to be admitted immediately. I spent 4 days in the hospital. On the first day, I sent a text to my mother. Nothing dramatic. Just in the hospital with pneumonia, pretty sick. Will keep you posted. She did not respond for 26 hours. When the response came, it read, "Oh no, are you eating? Make sure you're eating. Let me know when you're out." That was the entirety of it. No offer to come, no phone call. My father sent nothing at all. I assume he either wasn't told or decided it was not something that required a response from him. Cassie texted 2 days after I was discharged. "Heard you were sick. Hope you're better," with a small sun emoji at the end. A sun emoji. I lay in that hospital bed for 4 days, and the person who checked on me most consistently was my colleague Priya, who brought me soup from the Indian restaurant near the clinic and sat with me for 2 hours on the third afternoon, reading terrible celebrity gossip magazines out loud until I laughed hard enough to trigger a coughing fit. Priya had known me for 14 months. My mother had known me for 29 years. I filed that information in the archive. It was getting full by then. It was during that hospital stay that I received the first real call from Rosalind Faber. I had met Rosalind perhaps a dozen times in my life, at family gatherings at holidays, once at a funeral for a great uncle whose name I could no longer remember. She was my mother's aunt, by blood the younger sister of my late grandmother. 83 years old. She lived alone in a craftsman house in Asheville. North Carolina had never married, had spent 40 years as a high school English teacher, and possessed the particular quality that the best teachers develop over decades, the ability to observe a room without appearing to observe it at all. She called on the 3rd day of my hospital stay. I didn't recognize the number at first. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Lenora." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, precise, unhurried, the voice of someone who chose every word intentionally. "I heard you were unwell." I wanted to call myself rather than send a message. Messages feel lazy when someone is ill. I was so surprised that for a moment I didn't know what to say. "How did you know?" I asked. "Your cousin Margaret mentioned it. She heard from your mother." A brief pause. I understand no one has come to be with you. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it as one. I'm fine, I said. It's pneumonia. I'll be discharged tomorrow. I'm sure you will be. Another pause. Lenora, I've been watching your family for a long time, longer than you might realize. And I want to say something to you that I don't believe anyone in your family has said with sufficient clarity. I waited. You are remarkable, she said. Not because you're useful, not because you're low maintenance or practical or easy to manage, but because of who you actually are, the work you do, the way you think, the fact that you drove yourself to the hospital alone on a Tuesday rather than burden anyone. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something careful and deliberate, like she had been waiting a long time to say this. That last part is not a virtue, sweetheart. That's a wound, and I think you know that. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside my hospital window, Rochester was gray and cold. A light snow had started sometime in the afternoon and was settling silently on the rooftops. I've been thinking about getting my affairs in order. Rosalind continued, her tone shifting slightly lighter, more practical. I'm 83. It's sensible at this point. I've been working with an attorney in Asheville on some paperwork. I want things to go where they should go. That sounds like a good idea, I said carefully. It is. A small pause. I just wanted you to know I was thinking of you. Rest well. She hung up before I could ask anything more. I set the phone on the blanket and looked at the ceiling for a long time. I had spent 29 years being told in 100 different quiet ways that I was the self-sufficient one, the practical one, the one who didn't need anything. And in 4 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon, an 83-year-old woman I had met a dozen times had looked directly through all of it and named what she saw. I did not know what Rosalind Faber was putting in those documents. I did not know that she had been documenting things of her own for years, specific things, dated things, the kind of things that a 40-year career teaching literature trains you to record with precision. I did not know any of that yet. But lying in that hospital bed, in a city where I had moved alone with 2 suitcases, I felt for the first time, in as long as I could remember, genuinely seen. 2 months later, I found a hematology report in my own data. And everything changed. I want to tell you what it is like to read your own test results, not as a patient, as a researcher, as someone who has spent 6 years learning to look at numbers on a page and extract meaning from them with clinical precision and zero emotional interference. That is a skill you develop deliberately in this field. You have to, because if you let yourself feel everything you read, you cannot function. You cannot do the work. I read my biopsy results on a Monday morning in April, sitting at my desk in the research building. The report had come through the internal system. I had flagged my own file for immediate notification, which is something you can do when you work in the institution running your tests. I had my coffee. I had my second monitor open to a dataset I had been analyzing all week. The notification appeared in the lower right corner of my screen, the way all notifications do quietly without ceremony, as if it were a meeting reminder or a software update. I clicked on it. I read the first 3 lines, then I read them again. There is a specific moment, and I have talked about this with colleagues who have gone through similar experiences, where the researcher brain and the patient brain are briefly horribly in the same room at the same time. The researcher brain reads the terminology and immediately begins cross-referencing. Stage 2, A nodular sclerosis subtype. The patient brain reads the same words and understands with a slow and spreading certainty that they are about you, about your body, your cells, your life. Both things happened simultaneously. I sat at my desk and I was both people at once, the one who understood the data and the one the data was about. It lasted perhaps 45 seconds. Then the researcher took over the way she always did, because that was the only thing I knew how to do when things became unbearable. I opened a second window and pulled up the current literature on stage 2, A lymphoma outcomes. I had contributed to some of it. I had co-authored a paper 18 months earlier on the efficacy of a modified treatment protocol for exactly this subtype. I knew the survival rates. I knew the treatment trajectory. I knew what the next 12 months would look like with reasonable statistical probability. The numbers were actually favorable, as these things go. I sat with that for a moment. Favorable, as these things go. Then I closed both windows, picked up my coffee, and stared out the window at the Rochester skyline for a long time without thinking about anything at all. I did not tell anyone at work that day. I told Priya that evening. She came over immediately, brought takeout from the Thai place we both liked, sat on my kitchen floor with me. We had never gotten around to buying a proper dining table. We always just ate on the floor, like graduate students, and said almost nothing for the first hour. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me statistics I already knew. She just stayed. At 9 o'clock, she said, "What do you need?" I thought about it for a long time. "I need to call my mother," I said. Priya looked at me carefully. She had heard enough about Rochelle over 14 months to understand what that statement contained. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Do you want me to stay while you do?" "No," I said. "I think I need to do it alone." She left at 9:30. I sat on my couch for another 20 minutes, turning my phone over in my hands. I want to be honest about something. Even then, even at 31, with a full academic career and a promotion, and 3 years of living independently in a city where I had built a real life, I still wanted my mother to be someone she had never been. That want does not go away cleanly. It doesn't respond to evidence or logic or years of carefully filed memories. It sits at the bottom of everything and waits. I had just received a cancer diagnosis, and what I wanted in that moment more than anything else I could name was to call my mother and have her answer the phone the way mothers answer the phone when something is wrong. I called her at 9:53 in the evening. She picked up on the third ring. The television was on in the background. I could hear it clearly, some kind of home renovation program, the host's voice bright and enthusiastic about an open-concept kitchen. "Lenora!" The half-beat. Always the half-beat. "Hi, Mom." I kept my voice steady. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" Her tone shifted slightly, not to concern exactly, more to a kind of prepared impatience, the tone of someone bracing for an inconvenience. "I got my biopsy results today." A pause. "Biopsy." "What biopsy?" "You didn't tell me you were having a biopsy." I didn't want to say anything until I had results. There was a lymph node that I flagged during a routine self-examination. I've been monitoring it for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Her voice was tighter now. "You've been monitoring something for 6 weeks, and you didn't say anything." I didn't want to worry anyone unnecessarily. "Well?" A short exhale. "What did it say?" I noticed she didn't phrase it as a question. "It's lymphoma," I said. "Stage 2, A. The subtype has a good treatment response rate. I already know the protocol. I stopped myself. I'd been about to explain that I had co-authored research on this exact subtype. I realized mid-sentence that this was not the moment for that. "The prognosis is positive," I said instead. "But I'll need to start treatment soon. Chemotherapy, 6 cycles. It's going to be a significant year." The home renovation program continued in the background. The host said something enthusiastic about subway tile. 15 seconds passed. "Well," my mother said. Her voice had settled into something I recognized the tone she used when a situation had been assessed and filed. "You work in a hospital. You know all the right people. I'm sure they'll take good care of you." I stared at the wall across from my couch. There was a small print I had bought at a street market in Rochester, a botanical illustration of a fern. I had always meant to frame it properly and never gotten around to it. It was held up with a single piece of painter's tape. "I was hoping you might, I don't know, come for a visit, during the first treatment maybe. It would help to have—" "Lenora?" Her voice was firm, not unkind exactly, just closed. "Final. I can't just pick up and go to Minnesota. Your father has his appointments, and Cassie's youngest has been having a difficult time at school, and I'm already stretched very thin. You're a grown woman. You work in the medical field. You are genuinely the most capable person I know to handle something like this." There it was again. The most capable person I know to handle something like this. The thing she meant as a compliment. The thing that meant I don't have to come. "I understand," I said. "Call me when you know your treatment schedule," she said. "And Lenora, eat properly. That matters more than people realize." "I know, Mom. I study oncology." Good night." 43 seconds. I know I told you that number in the beginning. But I want you to understand that was not the first call. That was the call 7 days later, the one she made to ask about Rosalind's will. This call, the one I just described, lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. 4 minutes and 11 seconds to tell my mother I had cancer and be told in the language she had always used on me that I was too capable to need her. I sat on that couch for a long time after she hung up. The fern print on the wall rustled slightly in the draft from the heating vent. And I thought with the same quiet clarity I used to analyze data, I already know what comes next. I have read this study before. I know exactly how this ends. What I did not know was that in 6 days, she would give me the evidence I had been collecting my whole life. The 6 days between that phone call and the next one were not dramatic. That is something I want to be clear about. There was no single moment of collapse, no night spent crying on the bathroom floor. I have read enough stories and lived enough of my own to know that the most significant shifts rarely announce themselves with appropriate ceremony. They happen quietly in the margins of ordinary days while you are making coffee or walking to your car or staring at a botanical print held up with painter's tape. I started my treatment intake process. I met with Dr. Krishnamurthy, who handled the news with the same steady professionalism I had always admired in him and who immediately connected me with the department's best oncologist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, who had 30 years of experience and the particular gift of making clinical information feel human without making it feel soft. I liked her immediately. I told Priya everything. I told 2 other colleagues who needed to know for scheduling purposes. I did not tell my family anything further. I had said what I needed to say. The response I received told me everything I needed to know about what further disclosure would produce. I was not angry, not yet. I was something more precise than angry. I was clear. On the 6th day, a Tuesday, I was sitting at my kitchen counter eating lunch and reviewing a grant proposal when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for 4 full rings. Not because I was hesitating. I had already decided somewhere in the quiet of those 6 days exactly what I would do if she called back. I was simply giving myself a moment to make sure I was ready to do it calmly. I opened the recording application. The red button appeared. I pressed it, watched it blink once, twice, 3 times, steady and patient, like a small heartbeat. Then I answered, "Rochelle." I used her first name deliberately. I had never done it before in 31 years. It felt strange in my mouth, not wrong exactly, but significant. Like stepping through a door you had always walked past. A half-second pause on her end. I had surprised her. "Lenora." Her voice recovered quickly. She was skilled at recovery. "I've been meaning to call. I wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" I noticed she did not say "I'm sorry, I rushed off the other night." I noticed she did not say "I've been thinking about you." She said she had been meaning to call, which is a very different thing. Meaning to call is something you say about returning a library book. "I'm managing," I said. "Thank you for asking." "Good, good." A brief pause. Then with a smoothness that would have been impressive in other circumstances. I heard something through Margaret, actually. She mentioned that you'd been in touch with Aunt Rosalind recently, and that Rosalind had mentioned something about her affairs. Her paperwork? There it was. 11 days after my diagnosis. 7 days after she had ended a 43-second call about my cancer. She had arrived efficiently and without detour at the real subject. I kept my voice completely even. "Rosalind called me when I was in the hospital with pneumonia last year," I said. "We've been in touch since then." "I see." A careful pause. "She mentioned her arrangements to you specifically." "She mentioned she was getting her affairs in order. She said it was sensible at her age." Of course, of course." Another pause. Rochelle was choosing her words the way she always chose her words, with the care of someone who believed she was being subtle. "It's just that Rosalind is getting on in years, and I want to make sure she has the right support around her. Family support, and obviously if there are any decisions being made about her estate, it would make sense for the family to be involved, to make sure everything is handled appropriately." I let a moment of silence sit between us. "What kind of involvement did you have in mind?" I asked. "Well," she shifted into a warmer register, the teacher voice, the neighborhood volunteer voice, the voice that had charmed 30 years of school parents. "Cassie and I were thinking we might go down to Asheville for a visit. It's been too long since we've seen Rosalind, and it would be good to understand her situation better. Make sure she isn't being, I don't know, influenced by people who don't have her best interests at heart." The recording timer read 6 minutes and 40 seconds. I understood exactly what she was saying. She was telling me that she intended to go to Asheville and position herself and Cassie as Rosalind's primary family support before any documents were finalized. She was also with the phrase, influenced by people who don't have her best interests at heart, suggesting that I was that person. I was the person being accused of manipulating an elderly woman, by the woman who had spent 31 years telling me I was too capable to need anything. I took a slow breath. In the background of my own apartment, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. The grant proposal was still open on my laptop. Everything was very ordinary and very quiet. "That sounds like a lovely idea, Sal," I said. "I'm sure Rosalind would appreciate seeing you." A small pause. She had expected more resistance. "Yes? Well, I just wanted to make sure we were all communicating, as a family, of course. And Lenora," her voice softened almost convincingly. "How are you really doing with everything?" 7 words. How are you really doing with everything? Asked at the 11-minute mark of a conversation that had spent its first 10 minutes on Rosalind Faber's estate. I looked at the recording timer. 11 minutes and 4 seconds. She had spent 11 minutes on the will. She had spent 11 seconds on my cancer. "I'm doing well," I said. "The treatment team is excellent. I'm in good hands." "Good, that's good." Relief in her voice, relief that I had not asked for anything, had not required anything, had confirmed once again that I was the capable one who did not need her to show up. "Well, keep me posted. And think about Thanksgiving. We'd love to have you home." "I'll let you know," I said. "Take care of yourself." "I will." She hung up. I sat at the kitchen counter and did not move for a long time. The recording timer read 11 minutes and 37 seconds. I stopped it. I saved the file. I named it the way I named all my research files, with a date and a descriptor. Clean, precise. April Rosalind Inquiry Call. Then I opened a second folder on my hard drive. Inside it was the first file, the one from 6 days earlier, the one that read April Cancer Disclosure Call. Duration 4 minutes 11 seconds. I put them side by side, 4 minutes to tell her I had cancer. 11 minutes for her to ask about Rosalind's money. I looked at those 2 files for a long time. Something settled inside me in that moment, not dramatically, not with any particular heat. It settled the way a final piece of data settles when you have been building a study for years, and the last result confirms everything the preceding results have been pointing toward. Quietly, completely, without the possibility of revision. I was not going to spend any more of my life trying to be seen by people who had decided not to look. I was not going to argue or confront or plead or explain. I was going to do what I had always done. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be patient. And I was going to let the evidence speak. I had 2 audio files, a 31-year archive, and a treatment schedule starting in 3 weeks. And somewhere in Asheville, North Carolina, an 83-year-old woman had already been building her own case for much longer than I had. I picked up my fork. I finished my lunch. I went back to the grant proposal. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt something close to calm. Not because things were good, but because I finally completely knew exactly where I stood. And I had stopped pretending otherwise. The first chemotherapy infusion was on a Wednesday morning in late April. Priya drove me. She had offered, without being asked, which I was still learning to accept gracefully, the receiving of things I had not requested from people who gave them freely. It was harder than it sounds when you have spent 31 years operating on the assumption that asking for things produces disappointment. We left my apartment at 7 in the morning. The Rochester sky was the particular pale gray of early spring, the kind of gray that is not quite overcast but not quite clear, either suspended waiting. I had my bag packed the way I packed for everything, methodically, nothing unnecessary. A book, my laptop, a water bottle, the small framed photograph of myself and Priya from a department Christmas party 2 years earlier that I kept on my nightstand and had tucked in at the last minute without entirely knowing why. Dr. Owens met me in the infusion suite. She was matter-of-fact in the way I appreciated no excessive gentleness, no performance of sympathy. She explained what the next several hours would feel like, what the following days would likely involve, what I should watch for, and what I should not worry about. She spoke to me as someone who understood the science because I did, and I was grateful for that. The infusion itself took 4 hours and 20 minutes. I read for the first 2 hours. Then I was too tired to read, and I looked out the window instead. Priya sat in the chair beside me and graded papers. She was adjunct faculty at a local college, on top of her research position, and occasionally read me headlines from her phone, in a low voice, the way you might read to someone who is half asleep, not expecting a response, just providing the sound of another person being present. I thought about my mother exactly once during those 4 hours. I thought, she does not know I am here right now. She does not know what this room looks like, or what the chair feels like, or that there is a woman named Priya sitting next to me, grading undergraduate essays about the French Revolution, while I receive chemotherapy for a cancer that my mother has not asked about since she asked about Rosalind's will. I thought that. Then I let it go. I looked back out the window. I had work to do. The following 18 months were the hardest of my life, and also in ways I am still understanding the most clarifying. 6 cycles of chemotherapy, each cycle 3 weeks apart. The side effects were significant fatigue that was unlike any tiredness I had experienced before, a bone-deep exhaustion that made the simple act of standing in the shower feel like a negotiation. Nausea that came and went on its own schedule, indifferent to medication or careful eating or any of the other things you do to manage it. A persistent sensitivity to cold that turned Rochester winters into something almost comedic. I wore 3 layers inside my own apartment from November through February. I went to work when I could. On the days I could not, I worked from home. Dr. Krishnamurthy had arranged a modified schedule with more flexibility than I deserved by any institutional measure, and I was aware of that and did not waste it. I kept my caseload as close to normal as I could manage. I attended department meetings via video when I could not be there in person. I completed my sections of the grant proposal we had been working on and submitted it 3 days before the deadline. There is something I need to tell you about that grant proposal. The research it funded a clinical trial examining modified treatment protocols for nodular sclerosis lymphoma. My specific subtype was one I had been part of designing for the previous 2 years. I had contributed significantly to the methodology section, the patient selection criteria, the outcome measurement framework. I had sat in rooms with doctors and statisticians and argued sometimes quite forcefully for approaches that I believed the data supported. During my 4th cycle of chemotherapy, lying in the infusion chair with Priya beside me, reading about the French Revolution, it occurred to me for the first time, with full clarity, that the protocol being used to treat me was one I had helped design. I had spent 2 years building the road I was now walking down. I sat with that for a long time. There are no words that adequately describe what that feels like. It is not triumphant. It is not ironic in the way irony usually feels sharp and a little cruel. It is something quieter and stranger than either of those things. It is the feeling of a circle closing in a way you never anticipated, in a way that reminds you that the work you do when no one is watching still matters, that it goes somewhere, that it comes back. I thought about the first place ribbon in the bottom drawer. I thought about the scholarship letter on the kitchen counter. I thought about 4 years of silent Saturday mornings with my research and my books while Rochelle and Cassie made plans in the next room. All of it had led here, to this chair, to this protocol, to this outcome. In month 10, my PET scan came back clean. Dr. Owens showed me the images herself. She pointed to the areas that had been active before and were now quiet. She used the word remarkable, not as a compliment exactly, but as a clinical descriptor. Remarkable clearance, remarkable response to treatment. I looked at those images for a long time. You co-authored the protocol that treated you, Dr. Owens said. She said it the way she said most things straightforwardly without drama. I thought you should know that I think about that sometimes. I think about it too, I said. She nodded. Good outcome, boss. I drove home alone that evening. I had started driving myself to appointments by month 4. I had felt guilty enough about Priya's time and needed to feel capable of at least that much. I parked outside my building and sat in the car for a few minutes. Clean scan, month 10. I called Priya first. She screamed loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like weeks. I called Dr. Krishnamurthy, who said he was very glad, and also that the department needed me back at full capacity, as soon as medically reasonable, which I understood was his version of warmth. I did not call my mother. Not because I was punishing her. I want to be precise about that. I did not call her because the clean scan was mine. It belonged to me and to the people who had shown up to Priya and Dr. Owens and Dr. Krishnamurthy and every colleague who had covered my work or brought food to my door or sent a message on the bad days. It belonged to the version of myself who had sat in that infusion chair and kept working and kept going and kept building something worth building. It did not belong to anyone who had spent 11 minutes asking about a will. 2 months after the clean scan, the paper was published. The Journal of Clinical Oncology, the Modified Lymphoma Treatment Protocol. My name at the top of the author list, lead researcher, primary contributor, the person who had argued most forcefully for the methodology that the data had ultimately vindicated. Dr. Krishnamurthy forwarded me the published link with a single line, well deserved. I printed the abstract and pinned it to my refrigerator next to the card from my promotion and the photograph from the Christmas party. The botanical fern print had been properly framed by then and hung on the wall where it belonged. My apartment was starting to look like somewhere a person lived deliberately, like somewhere a person had chosen. The following month, I received an invitation to present the research at the National Oncology Research Conference in Chicago. 250 physicians and researchers, a keynote slot. My name in the program next to people I had been reading since graduate school. I accepted immediately. I did not tell my family. There was one more thing coming, something that had nothing to do with my work, my scans, or my publications, something that had been in motion in Asheville, North Carolina, for much longer than I had known. It arrived on a Tuesday in November, a phone call from a law office I did not recognize. A voice I had never heard before, calm and professional, asking if I was Lenora Voss. Yes, I said. Miss Voss, the voice said. My name is Charles Alderman. I am the estate attorney for Rosalind Faber. I'm calling because Miss Faber passed away peacefully in her sleep last Thursday, and per her instructions, I am required to notify you directly as the primary beneficiary of her estate. The refrigerator hummed. The fern print was perfectly level on the wall. I sat down slowly. I see, I said. We will need you present for the formal reading, Mr. Alderman said. There are other parties who will also be notified. Miss Faber left specific instructions about the reading, including a document she prepared herself that she has requested be read aloud in full at that time. A document, I said. Yes. A brief pause. She was quite particular about it, she said, and I am quoting directly from her instructions here, that she wanted everyone in the room to hear it, every word. I looked at the 2 audio files still saved on my laptop, the folder I had never deleted. April Cancer Disclosure Call. Duration 4 minutes, 11 seconds. April Rosalind Inquiry Call. Duration 11 minutes, 37 seconds. I'll be there, I said. The reading was scheduled for Saturday morning in late November. I drove to Asheville the day before. 14 hours from Rochester. I could have flown, it would have been faster, but I needed the time. I needed the particular quality of attention that long drives produce the way the road empties your mind of everything except forward motion. I left at 4 a.m. and drove through Pennsylvania and West Virginia and into North Carolina as the sky moved through every shade of gray and pink and pale winter blue. I had been to Rosalind's house 3 times in my life, once at 12, once at 19, once at 24. Each time I had noticed the same things: the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves in the front room, the narrow staircase with the wooden banister worn smooth by decades of hands, the smell of old paper and Earl Grey tea that seemed to be built into the walls themselves. It was the house of a person who had lived deliberately, who had filled every room with evidence of what she valued. I arrived at 7 p.m. The house was dark-locked, exactly as it had been left. Mr. Alderman's office had arranged for me to have a key. Rosalind had specified this in her instructions, which I was beginning to understand were very specific about a great many things. I let myself in. I turned on the lamp in the front room. I stood among the bookshelves for a long time. On the mantelpiece there was a photograph I had not noticed on my previous visits. Or perhaps I had noticed it and not understood what I was seeing. It was a school photograph, the formal kind, taken against a blue background, the subject in a neat collared shirt. A girl of perhaps 10 or 11. Dark hair, a slightly serious expression as though she had been told to smile and had compromised with something more honest. It was me, a school photograph of me on Rosalind Faber's mantelpiece in a small silver frame that had clearly been there long enough to leave a faint outline in the dust when I lifted it. I set it down carefully. I sat in the armchair nearest the window, and I stayed there for a very long time in the quiet dark of a house that had held my photograph on its mantelpiece for years, without my knowing. The law offices of Alderman and Associates were on the second floor of a brick building on Lexington Avenue in downtown Asheville. A waiting room with upholstered chairs, framed botanical prints on the walls. I noticed them immediately and thought of my own print in Rochester, and a receptionist who offered coffee with the practiced ease of someone who understood that people arrived at estate readings in complicated emotional states. I arrived at 9:15. The reading was at 10. My mother and Cassie arrived at 9:50. I heard them before I saw them. Rochelle's voice in the hallway, clear and social, the voice she deployed in professional settings. She was speaking to the receptionist with the particular warmth she reserved for people she had just met and wanted to impress. Cassie's heels were audible on the hardwood floor outside. They came through the door together. Rochelle saw me first. Something moved across her face, surprise, recalibration, and then the smooth recovery that was her most reliable skill. She smiled. It was a good smile. It had always been a good smile. Lenora. She crossed the room and embraced me briefly. The familiar scent of her perfume, the same one for 30 years, a department store fragrance she bought every December. I didn't know you'd be here already. I drove down yesterday, I said. Cassie kissed my cheek. She was wearing a coat I recognized from her Instagram, a camel-colored wool wrap she had posted about 2 months earlier, with a caption about treating herself. She looked well. She looked, in fact, the way she always looked in important settings, assembled confident, certain that rooms arranged themselves around her. Such a sad occasion, she said, glancing around the office with the assessing look she used in real estate showings. Though she was 83, a good long life. She had met Rosalind Faber perhaps 9 times. My father was not present. My mother mentioned when I asked that he had a medical appointment he could not reschedule. I nodded. It was consistent. 2 other relatives arrived shortly after distant cousins. I recognized vaguely a woman named Patricia and her adult son, whose name I had never retained. They sat on the opposite side of the room and spoke quietly to each other. Mr. Alderman appeared at exactly 10 o'clock. He was a compact, precise man in his 60s, with reading glasses he wore on a chain and the careful demeanor of someone who had conducted a great many of these proceedings and understood their weight. He introduced himself, confirmed the identities of everyone present, and asked us to be seated at the conference table. Rochelle positioned herself at the center of the table. Cassie sat to her right. I sat at the far end nearest the window. Outside Asheville's downtown was quiet. In the late November morning, the mountains visible in the distance above the rooftops, their ridges pale and bare. Mr. Alderman opened the folder in front of him. Before I read the specific provisions of Miss Faber's will, he said, I am required by the terms of the will itself to read a document that Miss Faber prepared and signed in the presence of 2 witnesses on September 14th of this year. She designated it as a personal statement and specified that it be read aloud in full before the financial provisions are disclosed. She was emphatic on this point. He looked up briefly over his glasses. I will read it now. Rochelle's hands were folded on the table. She smiled slightly, the composed smile of someone who expected good news and was being patient about receiving it. Mr. Alderman cleared his throat. My name is Rosalind Eleanor Faber. I am 83 years old, and I am of entirely sound mind, a fact my attorney can confirm, and which I mention because I anticipate it will be questioned by at least one person in the room. I have been a teacher for 40 years. The most important skill teaching gave me was not the ability to instruct. It was the ability to observe, to watch a room carefully and see what is actually happening rather than what people wish you to see. I have been observing my family for more than 30 years. What follows is what I saw. The room was very still. Rochelle's smile had not moved, but something behind it had shifted. Mr. Alderman continued reading. The letter was precise in the way that only a person with 40 years of practice putting language to paper can be precise. Rosalind had recorded specific incidents, not impressions, not general characterizations, but specific dated, detailed accounts. The school photograph she had requested from a relative and placed on her mantelpiece when Lenora was 10 because no one else in the family had offered her one. The scholarship letter she had heard about from Dolores and the full account of what Dolores had told her. The wedding toast that had lasted 7 minutes and not included the name of the younger daughter who had cleaned up until 2 a.m. She had noted the promotion phone call. She had noted the pneumonia hospitalization. She wrote in language that was neither sentimental nor cruel, but simply accurate. Rochelle has spent 30 years telling Lenora that her capability is the reason she requires nothing. This is a lie people tell capable children when they do not wish to be inconvenienced by them. I have watched Lenora believe this lie, and I have watched it cost her. She had noted, and here Mr. Alderman's voice remained steady and professional in a way I was deeply grateful for the 43-second call. She had learned about it from the same network of family connections that had always carried information in both directions. She had learned about it within days of it happening. She had called her attorney the following week. I am writing this so that no one in that room can later claim they did not know. So that the record is clear and permanent and witnessed. I am writing it because Lenora never would. Cassie had stopped looking around the room. She was looking at the table. Rochelle's hands were still folded. They were folded very tightly now. The knuckles had gone pale. Mr. Alderman set down the first document and picked up the second. The provisions of the will, he said, are as follows. He read them. Rosalind's Craftsman House in Asheville assessed at $1,080,000. Her savings and investment accounts, $822,000. Her personal library, her furniture, her jewelry, her car, the contents of every room. Everything. To Lenora Voss, to Rochelle, the Wedgwood china set. As promised years ago, at a dinner table, Rosalind had not forgotten. To Cassie, nothing. No provision, no mention. The room was completely silent. I looked at my hands on the table. They were steady. I had known something was coming. I had not known the scale of it. Had not known about the letter. Had not known about the photograph on the mantelpiece, or the years of careful watching. But I had known in the way you know things. You have not yet been told that Rosalind Faber saw me clearly. She had just made sure everyone else did too. Cassie's voice, when it came, was thin and high, in a way I had never heard from her before. This is a mistake, she said. Mr. Alderman looked at her over his reading glasses. It is not, he said. The reading ended at 11:14. Mr. Alderman collected his documents with the same measured efficiency with which he had presented them, thanked everyone for their time, and excused himself to allow the family a few moments before the next administrative steps. The two distant cousins left quickly and quietly. They had received small remembrances, a piece of jewelry each, and seemed to understand that whatever was about to happen in this room was not their business to witness. That left three of us. Rochelle did not move immediately. She sat at the center of the table with her hands still folded and her eyes on the middle distance the way a person sits when they are rapidly recalculating something they believed they had already solved. I had seen that expression on her face before, not often because she was skilled at not being caught recalculating, but I recognized it. Cassie stood up first. She pushed her chair back harder than necessary. The sound of it was very loud in the quiet room. I need to talk to you, she said. She was looking at me. All right, I said. She crossed to my end of the table. Up close, she looked different than she had 40 minutes earlier. The assembled confidence had come apart, slightly at the edges, like a hem beginning to unravel. Her voice when she spoke was the voice I had heard in the dressing room in Scottsdale years ago. The voice that existed only when she believed no one important was watching. You did this, she said. You spent time with her. You called her. You made yourself her favorite so she would leave you everything. That is what happened here. I looked at her steadily. I wrote letters to Rosalind for 17 years, I said, starting when I was 14. She wrote back. That is the entirety of what happened between us. That's manipulation. Cassie. My voice was very calm. I was not performing calm. I was actually calm in the deep and settled way I had been since the moment I sat in my Rochester apartment and looked at two audio files side by side. How many letters did you write her? A pause. That's not the point. How many times did you call her? Visit her. Ask her what she was reading, what she was thinking about, whether she needed anything. Her jaw tightened. She was your mother's aunt. She was family obligation, not. She was a person, I said. She was a remarkable, specific, particular person who spent 40 years teaching literature and who had more to say about the world than anyone in this family ever bothered to find out. I found out. That is the only thing I did. Cassie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I told people, she said. Her voice dropped slightly. Not from discretion, from something closer to the first real awareness of consequence I had ever seen on her face. I told people at work. I told my neighbors. I said I was expecting that there would be. I know, I said. She stared at me. I know, I said again. I saw the post. The color that moved across her face in that moment was something I had no particular satisfaction in witnessing. I want to be honest about that. There was no triumph in watching Cassie understand what she had done to herself. There was only the quiet, factual observation of a consequence arriving at its destination. She turned and walked to the window. She stood there with her back to the room. Rochelle came to me as I was gathering my coat from the chair near the door. She had composed herself. That was the thing about my mother, she was always composed when it mattered most to her. She crossed the room with the measured pace of someone who had decided exactly what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. Her expression was the expression of a person attempting to appear reasonable. Lenora, she stopped 2 feet away from me. I think we need to discuss this as a family. What would you like to discuss? This isn't right. You know it isn't right. Rosalind was elderly. She was isolated. She didn't have full context for. She had more context than anyone. I kept my voice even. She had 30 years of careful observation and 40 years of knowing how to record what she saw. The letter was precise. You heard it. Her expression shifted slightly. That letter was one person's interpretation. It was a documented account, specific dates, specific incidents. I picked up my coat. Mr. Alderman can speak to the legal standing. I'm not going to argue the contents with you. So that's it. Her voice thinned slightly, not quite to the sharp register she rarely showed in professional settings, but close. After everything, this family gave you everything you have. I stopped. I turned back to face her. I looked at her directly, fully, in a way I had spent most of my life avoiding because direct looking had always cost me something. The family gave me a white room, I said, and a 40-minute commute that became too difficult, and a scholarship letter placed on a kitchen counter that received 4 words, and a 7-minute wedding toast that did not include my name. I paused. And a 43-second phone call. Rochelle's lips pressed together. I am not angry with you, I said, and I meant it completely without performance. I spent a long time being angry. I spent longer than that being sad. I am not either of those things anymore. I am simply someone who knows very clearly what happened and has decided not to pretend otherwise. She looked at me for a long moment. I watched her cycle through several responses: justification, counter-argument, the appeal to family loyalty. She had deployed my entire life. I watched her find each one insufficient. She said nothing. If you want to be part of my life, I said, the terms are honesty, not apology. I am not asking you to perform remorse you don't feel. Just honesty. About what happened, about what was true. I buttoned my coat. That offer doesn't expire, I said. But it doesn't wait forever either. I walked past her to the door. I walked down the stairs and out onto Lexington Avenue into the cold Asheville morning. The mountains were clearer now, the pale ridges sharp against the November sky. I stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed. For the first time in 31 years, I had not left a room in that family wondering if I had said the right thing, wondering if I had been too much or too little, or the wrong shape entirely. I had said exactly what was true. That was enough. That was, it turned out, more than enough. It is now 2 years since that Saturday morning in Asheville. I live in Rosalind's house. I did not plan to. I had assumed I would sell it, take the proceeds, return to Rochester, and continue the life I had built there. But I came back to Asheville in December to begin the estate process, and I walked into the front room with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the smell of old paper and Earl Grey tea, and I stood there for a long time. Then I called Dr. Krishnamurthy and asked whether the department would consider a hybrid arrangement. He said yes before I finished the sentence. I work remotely 4 days a week now. I fly to Rochester 1 week each month for in-person research sessions and department meetings. The arrangement suits me better than I expected. It turns out a person who does her best thinking in quiet rooms surrounded by books, which is something Rosalind apparently understood about me long before I understood it about myself. I have repainted 1 room. The small bedroom at the back of the house, which Rosalind used as a study, now has walls the color of pale sage green, not because I planned it that way. not as any kind of gesture toward the bedroom I never got. I found the color in a paint swatch at a hardware store, and it was simply the right one. I noticed afterward what it was. I let myself feel that for a moment. Then I hung my botanical fern print on the wall and went back to work. The question I am asked most often by the few people who know the full story is whether I have spoken to my mother since Asheville. The answer is yes, twice in the first year. Once when she called on a Sunday evening in February 4 months after the reading. She asked how I was. She asked about the house. She did not mention the letter, the will, or the conversation in Mr. Alderman's office. She spoke for 8 minutes in the warm social register she used, with people she was trying to maintain a relationship with. I answered her questions honestly and without hostility. When she hung up, I sat with the call for a while and assessed it the way I assess data, looking for what was actually there, rather than what I wished were there. What was there was effort, incomplete, imperfect, possibly self-interested effort. But effort nonetheless. The second call was in September. She mentioned that Cassie was going through a difficult time, the details of which I will not share, because they are Cassie's details, not mine. She did not ask me for anything. She simply told me. I understood this as its own kind of reaching and offering of information, as a substitute for the more direct things she did not yet know how to say. I told her I hoped Cassie would be all right. I meant it. Whatever happened between Cassie and me, whatever she said in that conference room in Asheville, I do not wish her harm. She is a person, shaped by the same household I was shaped by, just shaped differently, given different things, asked to become a different kind of problem. I understand that now in a way I could not have understood it at 25. My father sent a Christmas card, signed by both of them. No additional message. I put it on the kitchen counter, Rosalind's kitchen counter, which is old butcher block and runs the full length of the back wall, and looked at it for 3 days. Then I wrote back a short note. Nothing elaborate, just an acknowledgement that the card had arrived and been received. It felt like the right proportion of response. I want to tell you about the morning I got my second clean scan, 18 months post-treatment. The scan that Dr. Owens described as confirmation of full remission, the one that meant the word remission, could now be replaced cautiously and with the appropriate medical qualifications with something closer to recovered. I was in Rochester for my monthly week. I got the results on a Wednesday morning, sitting in the same chair in the same parking garage where I had sat 2 years earlier and counted concrete pillars. I had not planned to go there. I had been driving back to my hotel and had turned into the garage without quite deciding to, the way you sometimes return to a place when something has completed. I sat in that car for a long time. I thought about the 43 seconds. I thought about Priya reading about the French Revolution while I received chemotherapy. I thought about Dr. Owens saying remarkable clearance, and Dr. Krishnamurthy saying well-deserved, and Rosalind saying you are remarkable, from a hospital chair in Rochester on a gray February afternoon. I thought about a 10-year-old girl in a school photograph in a silver frame on a mantelpiece in Asheville. Serious expression, dark hair. The compromise between the smile she'd been asked for and the more honest thing. I thought she turned out all right. That girl. She turned out more than all right. I did not cry in the parking garage. I am not generally a person who cries in parking garages. But I sat there for a long time, and I let everything be exactly what it was, the grief and the relief and the particular complicated gratitude of surviving something and understanding fully what the surviving cost and what it produced. Then I called Priya. She screamed again, loud enough that I held the phone away from my ear again, which made me laugh again. Some things I am glad to say remain consistent. The paper I'm currently writing is about long-term outcomes in patients who participated in modified lymphoma treatment protocols. It is in the dryly circular way of research careers, a follow-up study to the work that treated me. I am the lead author. I sit at Rosalind's desk in the sage green room to write it surrounded by her books, with Earl Grey tea I have learned to make correctly loose leaf, 4 minutes, never longer. I am 33 years old. I have a house full of books and a desk by a window and a career I built from scratch in a city where I arrived with 2 suitcases and no safety net. I have Priya, who remains the person I call first for everything that matters. I have colleagues who respect my work and a supervisor who told a room full of people that the department was lucky to have me. I have, in the language Rosalind used in her letter, gone where I should go. I am not waiting for my family to see that. I am not withholding it from them either. It simply exists, fully and independently, whether they see it or not. That is what I have learned, that the life you build does not require an audience. It does not become real when someone else confirms it. It was real all along. I think about Rosalind often. I think about 40 years of careful observation of watching a room and seeing what was actually there. I think about the letter she wrote, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of the same impulse that made her a great teacher for 4 decades. The impulse to make sure the truth was recorded somewhere, to make sure it did not disappear. She gave me many things: the house, the books, the sage green room, the photograph in the silver frame which now sits on my own mantelpiece where I can see it from the desk. But the most important thing she gave me was not in the will. It was the phone call in the hospital. The 4 minutes on a gray Rochester afternoon when she looked directly at everything I was and said, "I see you. You are real. You are enough." It took me a long time to believe her. I believe her now. The people who show up in the hardest rooms, the infusion chairs, the hospital beds, the parking garages at 7 in the morning, those are your people. Blood doesn't make a family. Showing up does. Build toward the ones who show up. And if no one has told you lately, you are seen. You are enough. You always were. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with family? How did it change your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.